This is the Robin Hood Gardens estate in Poplar, East London. The government has agreed with the advice of English Heritage not to list this building. But many people, particularly those in the architectural community, are passionate about it. So why doesn't it pass the test for being a listed building? And how do these decisions get made? It is impressively monumental, even sculptural. The two blocks are angled or cranked, and the concrete fins which were constructed to help deflect noise create a rhythmic elevation. Between the two blocks is an unusual and evocative landscape described by the architects as a stress-free zone, providing a clever oasis from the surrounding traffic. We agree that the late Peter and Alison Smithson are celebrated architectural theoreticians, and indeed English Heritage has previously listed 3 of their finest schemes. Robin Hood Gardens was founded on architectural ambition, and it has attracted a good amount of academic interest. However, the set criteria for listing post-war buildings are very strict. After careful assessment, we found that the Robin Hood Gardens estate failed to fully meet them. We needed to examine not just its architectural interest, but also whether it fulfilled its original brief, whether it was a particularly good example of a development in housing, how well it survives, and how influential the building was. Firstly, in our view, as housing, it has serious shortcomings, and did have from the start. This judgment isn't based on its present condition, but on the original design. The Smithsons were forced to amend their designs for structural reasons late in the day, and the resulting compromise is really apparent. You can see this in the indefensibly narrow, twisting stairwells. There are far too few of them, and their tightness is uncomfortable and quite threatening. They have never provided adequate access to those long, windswept decks and to people's front doors. The decks themselves, perhaps because they are not particularly generous and overlook constant traffic, never did fulfill their brief and work as community-fostering streets in the sky, as decks have in other estates. The shortcomings can also be seen in the atmosphere created by the prison-like boundary walls intended to baffle traffic noise, the bleak entrance lobbies, and the isolated parking areas where no one can see what's happening and there's no easy way out. Secondly, by the time the estate was opened in 1972, it was already out of date and at the end of the high-rise Streets in the Sky movement, so it was not significantly influential in this way. This is the Park Hill estate in Sheffield. It was completed a decade earlier and on a much more confident scale. The Streets in the Sky here were therefore innovative, as well as being wider and more accessible, more livable. This estate is listed. We also considered that the Robin Hood Gardens estate does not compare successfully with other Grade 2 listed post-war housing schemes, such as the Barbican and the Brunswick Centre. Robin Hood Gardens has suffered from incremental changes and additions in the last 30 years, and features like the colour schemes that help children identify where they lived have been lost. Lastly, the estate attracted little admiration from architectural critics at the time, or in the immediate later years. We understand the disappointment of some of this building's admirers, and we share their appreciation of its role in an intellectual story. Yet, while we feel the Robin Hood Gardens estate did meet some of the challenges of a difficult site, in the end it failed in its brief to create a housing development which worked on human terms. English Heritage thoroughly and fairly considered evidence from every contributor and visited the site a number of times throughout the decision-making process. It was considered at all levels of our Heritage Protection Department, by our external advisory panel, and also by Commission, our decision-making body. We cannot just list buildings because they are threatened. The listing assessment must be an objective judgment, free from influence, and the criteria must be met. Listing cannot be swayed by public will, convenience, emotion, or external pressure. Listing, however, isn't actually what saves buildings. Listed buildings that have shown to be unworkable have still been demolished. Listing is simply a mark of special interest in a national context. It can often be argued that good, non-listed buildings should be kept. Perhaps large alterations would overcome the faults of the original design and make it both a pleasant and interesting place to live. Listing the building may not even have helped in this process. English Heritage has a well-respected track record in recommending post-war buildings for listing. We have listed 13 post-war public housing estates in London alone, and over 330 post-war buildings and complexes nationally.